What if you lived during a time when there was daily news that covered demonstrations protesting America's involvement in a war? With the need for more to serve, a draft being imposed on the American people to provide bodies to fight a war within Vietnam while politicians back in Washington made decisions based on a political agenda. With the division extending even amongst the men being sent over there, which category would you fall into? Our next guest made that choice and was a volunteer to the most skilled and dangerous unit to have served during that time. Meet John Stryker Meyer, author of the book Across the Fence and other books that cover his and his teammates' time operating within Studies and Observation Group during the secret war within Vietnam. Join us on today's episode of Veteran Success Story. Before we start this next episode, I wanted to get on here and say thank you to my guest for coming on here, sharing some of the incredible stories of what he's been through and imparting some of the wisdom that he's learned along the way. Heck of a guy, John Stryker Meyer. He's got 3 books out currently with another on the way. Across the Fence was his first. On the Ground was sprinkled in some more, and then the SOG Chronicles. More currently, he's running a project called SOG Cast to try to get down more of the history and heritage of the people that he served with within SOG, and was born out of a conversation with Jocko on the Jocko podcast. I believe it was 180 was the first one. So this one's a little different, and I know I had a little bit of a different start as there were a few technical difficulties along the way. So I was a little nervous. Here I am talking to one of my heroes, and but I do have to say that Mr. John Stryker Meyer, you knocked it out of the park, and thank you so much for coming on. I'm not going to take the audience's time any longer, but we're gonna roll right into this. So as long as you can deal with some of my fumblings along the way, you're in for a real treat of an episode. So without further ado, welcome to Veteran Success Story. Today on Veteran Success Story, we're talking with John Stryker Meyer. And for those who don't know who he is, I mean, really, honestly, you could just Google his name out there. I don't think I have many listeners that are going to be tuning in that don't know who you are, John. But John, he wrote, back in the day, wrote a book, Across the Fence, about his time within Studies and Observations Group in Vietnam, to where, wow, you guys experienced a hell of a time over there. You know, I mean, just seeing the secret war within Vietnam and a lot of the stuff with what, in my experience and stuff, what would be called the real war. You know, it's kind of behind there, but they're bringing in personnel, vehicles, equipment, logistics, everything through other countries, through Laos and Cambodia. And here you guys find yourselves, this is all stuff that I read about when I was younger in my searches through the library, but didn't know what it was until later on, until I'm seeing stuff, until I actually picked up, and you interviewed Nick Brockhausen on your show Sogcast, but that was right. What I picked up and then realized what I had read about, because they never talked about it. They talked about it in ways of, these guys were attached to a CIA element, or, wore black man jams out on, or black pajamas out on patrol. And then realizing, oh man, these are the stories that these guys I read about when I was younger. And it kind of influenced my own book. But John, it's great to have you on the show. It's amazing to see, the book, but then also reconnecting with all these guys through Sogcast, which is really one of the main points that I want to get to towards the end, is to find out your progression towards that, but reconnecting with those guys and getting these stories documented from people that, were there, and getting these different viewpoints and perspectives and everything. It's quite the thing that you're doing there. And it's gotta be special from your end too.
Well, with you and I both being paratroopers and having spent time in the Army, you appreciate the following fact. The podcast that you're speaking of, they're called SOG Cast. We now have 51 posted on Apple and Spotify, and about 25 or 26 are up on YouTube now. That's all done courtesy of Jocko Willink, a Navy SEAL.
Yeah.
He's paid for all the production costs, all the equipment that I have at my house for the recording studio. So I have to start off by giving Jocko a salute because he's done more for our SOG stories, recording our guys than anybody in the Army.
That is, I mean, and I know we even talked about when I first reached out to you and stuff, we had talked about something with one of the museums and some of the preservation of history and stuff. And I know some of the stuff that came back from you, I must have faced just because of during the time in Vietnam and the sentiment within the country. And then you understanding the importance of putting this stuff down historically or preserving this history, but the frustration of having to deal with that end of things to where the country either didn't want to hear it, you're like, this is falling on deaf ears. You know, that's a heck of a thing to overcome. And I mean, at this point, that's got to be a heck of a thing to see because it's almost like it's just led up to that.
Well, yeah, don't forget the first thing too, Will. We signed an NDA, so for 20 years you can't talk about it. You're
Yeah.
sitting at the dinner table, your mom goes, "Well, Johnny, what did you do in Vietnam?" "Well, I was really busy, you know. We Green Berets, we worked very hard, Mom. Pass the mashed potatoes."
Yeah. Change
Please.
the subject, use a little bit of that Green Beret training.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Was the
Uh,
deny, make counter accusations, the whole bit.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. So the thanks to Jocko, we've been pushing that, and it's been like a sidebar, and it's delayed me getting around to writing my fourth book. But on January the 2nd, after my wife and I and our family get done celebrating New Year's, I'm going to sit down and get serious about book four.
Oh,
I got
wow.
more SOG stories we haven't talked about yet, or we have,
Very
but
cool.
not in detail enough to put them in a book.
Oh man, that's cool. I'm looking forward to that. That's
Yeah,
very
just
cool.
got to get off my dead ass, you know?
Hey, you know what? Sometimes though it happens. Like you have to have like people. I know with mine, like people keep asking, like, how long did it take you to put it down? And I know to put it on paper, and thankfully, because the partner that I had is she was just very understanding to it. And I was like, look, I am going to focus. I'm going to go full focus mode. You're probably not going to see me for 2 weeks. And it was just running in between stuff, two
Yeah.
weeks to a month in between there. But really, that story and those stories and stuff that are in there, and I'm sure it's the same with you, they're just locked in. You have that inside of you. And when you go to put this stuff down on paper, um, once that story is there, once it's compiled, once the timing is right, it just seems to flow. I mean, is that something that you kind of experienced with at least your first one or along the way?
Yeah, the first one was just like that, and just like you with Damn the Valley, you know. I mean, God, you did such a great job with it. And in my case, uh, I couldn't have done it without my wife also, because at the time we had four teenagers
Oh,
and
wow.
an infant crawling around the house. Where she said, "You got to write this," and I go, "Okay." So I'd work all day, come home, be a dad for a while, put the kids to bed, then write until midnight or 1 o'clock. This is back when it'd be like Jocko, you know, just only 3 or 4 hours of sleep.
Right. Well, that is something because I have found myself occasionally, that woken up out of a dead sleep or something, and you just have something running through your mind, and you're like, I
Oh
got to get
yeah.
this down, or you just you need a minute or something. But I will pop on and I'll see on Messenger because there is a little alert thing and be like, oh, this is like 3 a.m. and John's up. Like, what's he doing? Birds of a feather on that end.
Well, yeah. So now I'm trying to, but now that I'm a little bit older and a little bit more mature, I'm trying to get more sleep.
I hear you. It's I mean, is that something actually? Because I know we experienced a lot of that with some of the guys that I went out with. Was that those sleep cycles when when they're interrupted like that, or you're in that fight or flight mode. Quite honestly, we were in that fight or flight mode for around 9 months. Hellman was a different story, but once we got to the Argandab, did you kind of see some of that same thing to where you would find yourself in those weird sleep cycles or your mind racing where you're like you can't go to bed, or maybe the fact that you just had more energy than everyone else around you?
Well, energy, and then also I've been a sound sleeper. Like right now, if I'm asleep and the house got hit by a tornado, I'd sleep through it. But my first mission, where we were overnight in Laos, um, uh, I'll never forget it because I heard something that woke me up. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but it was actually the morning dew coming through the jungle, and the
Mm.
dewdrops were landing on the leaves. And so my hearing was much more as sensitive and alert. And so, yeah, so any noise at all that didn't seem right, we
Yeah.
bounced back, particularly when we were up with the RON. We didn't have the nogs that you guys had.
Oh, even with those though, I mean, really, what you're saying with relying on the senses, you can only those can only give so much, to where we even ran a lot of those the SEALs drills to where it's, hey, move a small distance, all right, halt a patrol, and stop, look, listen, use your senses, hunker back down for a second, all right, everything sounds normal, all right, move again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did the
So
same thing because we were in a jungle. We did 10, we would do, unless we were under some different circumstance, but a routine patrol, we never walked on trails. We stayed in the jungle. So you go 10 minutes and pause 10 just to let the jungle life come back because it had its own biorhythm.
yeah,
And that was always a key part of being in triple canopy.
I,
Absolutely.
I think that's any combat type situation. I mean, every single one of them, it has like your normalities and stuff, and then your outliers, and you start to become attuned to that, especially um when your life's on the line.
Oh,
You have
yeah.
stuff blowing up around you or people shooting at you, and it's just at that level to where uh those senses are heightened, and it's a different thing. It's a whole different experience, and some people you hope never to experience it, but at the same time, it's like, man, what a heck of an experience.
Oh, yeah.
So I know that this podcast is, man, the stories behind everything that you went through and stuff. It was just, again, for the people that don't know who you are, I'm just going to restate it really quick. But SOG is a unit that over 100% casualty rate. It was almost like if you signed up to be within SOG, you were getting hit one way or another, whether it was you're not coming back or the fact that you're coming back as a casualty with a Purple Heart. Uh, you know, to jump into that, um, and that extreme of a situation, and hearing some of these stories come back with like 10,000 plus people chasing you through the jungle. I mean, that's to live through that and then come back and reintegrate into society. Can you talk about maybe some of the things that you faced and experienced within that? I know a lot of that you couldn't talk about it. So, I
Well,
mean,
that's
like, how did you end up leave? Was it just like a simple end of service contract? Your contract was up, it was like, see you later. Like, what kind of led into the army? And then what was your way out? I know that's two
well. Let
very
me
separate.
also, you mentioned the casualty rate, and we've had an officer that's gone back and reviewed it, so we can no longer say it was 100% casualty,
Okay.
but we had a very high casualty rate. So I had to be accurate for the record. This has just come out the last few months. We had an officer go through all the records that were available.
Yeah.
And, but more importantly, with Thanksgiving Day here, we have a classic example of a mission where our 6-man recon team, the mission was to find the 1st, the 3rd, and the 7th NVA divisions in Cambodia that were MIA. The CIA, DIA, and whoever else does intel work over there had lost track of 3 NVA divisions in Cambodia. It was Thanksgiving, and of course, the fear was that after the Tet offensive of early '68, that they might be gearing up for another offensive in
Yeah.
'69.
Yeah.
And so our mission on that Thanksgiving Day, which I think is November 28th, '68, we had a 6-man team, and we went in. We literally walked into a base camp where it appeared one division had just left and another division was coming into it. And after we'd been on the ground for a while and we got into the base camp, we took pictures, and then a point element from the new division came up, and then a tail element from the one that had left came back at us. I'll never forget it.
Like
They were
caught right in
running
the middle.
short arms.
Ooh.
So um, we were doing our basic immediate reaction drills, had claymore mines with 5-second fuses on them and regular claymores. And of course, we had our M79 Grenadier with us. and myself and my assistant team leader, John Bubba Shore, we had M79s plus our car 15s. We were able to get back to the LZ. The Air Force, the 20th Special Operations Squadron, the Green Hornets, were able to get there quickly and were able to do suppressing gunfire with their gunships. And then we got out. And so that's one of those missions that you talk about that sticks in my mind, and it's kind of, as we're being recorded here near Thanksgiving of 2024, that mission always sticks in my mind. And that was just one of those days. It's just another day in SOG where we had the mission, we had to find them, we found them, and we survived it. And then fast forwarding to the second part of your question, in my case, the key factors to returning was when I got out, I had a second tour of duty, and I got out in April of 1970.
Mm.
And the key thing was to come home to my family, always very supportive. We had friends from church. We had a softball team. So it was like within 3 weeks, I was playing softball with the softball team like we had before the war. And I had those friends on the base there. And I had flunked out of college. So I got back to going to school because I really wanted to get a college degree. And so that was the way I fell into it. And had a new mission, which was to get educated.
Nothing
And
wrong with that.
the transition, we missed the adrenaline, but we also knew about the casualties. And I ran missions for 19 months. And I knew that at some point I was pushing the odds. And again, from the special forces side, when I left both times to come back to the States, I always felt guilty leaving my South Vietnamese behind
Yeah.
because I was alive thanks to their skill set. You know, they ran point when we had our firefights. We were just side by side fighting the communists. You know,
Yeah.
and there was a couple of times when I went through my entire load of ammo. We always had 600 plus rounds for the car 15, 10 to 12 rounds for the M79, and then the frag grenades, 10 to 12 frag grenades. Plus, I carried the radio, and no, they kept coming. They
That's
wouldn't
wow.
stop. We just literally stacked up the bodies more than one occasion.
Yeah. That's got to be terrifying. Like, I mean, I've heard the stories of it, but just having wave after wave, I think I've heard you describe it as something about what was it? You said it's we've come here to die, and it was just like
Well, that
they,
was our base. We had a base at Da Nang, and it was August 23rd, 1968. The NVA and the Viet Cong had planned an attack at that base. They worked on it for over a year.
yeah.
They did a practice attack in December of 67. And on the night when there's no moon, they hit with a sapper attack. They
Mm.
killed 16 Green Berets that night. And it was the highest casualty rate of special forces in our history.
Wow.
And they really planned it well. They executed well. And they wore bandanas and that said, "We came here to die." And they
Mm.
did. And they
Yeah.
just wore loincloths because they're sappers.
Yeah.
And they had satchel charges and a weapon, or just a weapon, or hand grenades. And there was fierce hand-to-hand combat for those early, and they attacked in the morning, like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, after everybody had been drinking and carrying on.
Yeah, it sounds like they knew exactly what they're. It's when you're in an area to where the enemy can infiltrate like that, or they have eyes on you, they know, and they're looking for that patterns of life and everything. It's an extremely dangerous place to be in.
Absolutely. And they even did a final briefing before they launched the attack. They did a final briefing in FOB4 in the indigenous troop mess hall.
Good Lord. Wow.
That's how much they had infiltrated. The guys came through the wire, they got together, had the briefing, and then they launched the attack. And fortunately, we had a recon team was up on Marble Mountain, which was the mountain. There's 3 or 4 mountains up there. They're called Marble Mountain.
Yep.
And Larry Trimble was up there with his recon team, and they took out the 2 mortar pits that were up there, mortaring the base as part of that attack.
Mm.
Had they not taken those out, the casualty rate would have been much, much more higher.
Man, that's oof.
Oh
And
yeah.
to go through that. And you even said two tours of duty there. So like you volunteered for SOG the first time, and then you kind of got drawn back to that action. Like, was it just like you felt that need to like, hey, like I survived this, I need to be back there with the people that I served with, or the Vietnamese that you know felt
It
drawn
was a
to?
combination. Plus, we had a couple of incidents in local bars that some folks weren't happy about, and law enforcement. So I went to the Pentagon, got my orders cut, came back, cleared base, and I had no leave time. So I went home, saw my folks, gave them the news I was going back, and a couple of days later, I was flying back to Vietnam, and
There you go.
I was between tours. I hated stateside duty. We were
Yeah.
in a 10th Special Forces group. I was in a signal company, and so I just wanted to get back. I really missed the team. I felt that we should be there, and I had a letter from one of my buddies said, "Hey, your timing was perfect. The MPs came here on Monday looking for you. We told you went back to Vietnam." So
Couldn't have timed that one better. So like,
indeed.
I mean, the draw there and stuff too. I mean, there's something to be said for the kind of the simplicity of the battlefield. You know, it's life, civilian life and stuff can be complicated, you know, in some cases when there's police involved, a little more complicated than others. But that simplicity of the battlefield, you know, I know where it's you do have the problems back home, but it is almost like you just leave it all behind, you know, and it's uh you're living one day to the next, you know, and quite honestly, not knowing if that next day is going to come. So there is something that's simple to that, and a draw to that too. I mean, do you ever miss kind of that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and the other thing too is special forces, the Green Berets at that time were the tip of the spear in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And then to have MACV SOG, we were detached. Our operational side of it was detached from the 5th Special Forces. So SOG was the elite of the most elite at that time.
Yeah.
And we knew it. And that's why it gave us extra motivation to get the job done. And so I was bored in the States. I missed my team. And yeah, missed the adrenaline rush. And then, in fact, when I got back to Vietnam, I had to do a courier run to Saigon.
Mm.
So I go down, did the courier run, dropped the stuff off at headquarters, and that night we had a safe house. You remember the movie Apocalypse Now, where Martin Sheen is lying in the hotel, and there
Yeah,
was a
been a while,
scene
but
where,
yeah.
and I swear he stole this from my head because I was at the hotel, lying on the bed, the fans swirling around, and I'm lying there going, when I was in Nam, I wanted to get back to stateside. Well, I got to stateside. I missed Nam. I missed my little people, my South Vietnamese.
Yeah.
So I'm back to Nam now. Shit, I could die here.
What have I done?
Oh yeah, yeah. But there's that scene. But that was the essence of that moment.
No kidding.
So I did. We got my old recon team was back with Lynn Black, and we got back to running missions again.
So when you found yourself at the end there, you separated from service. So did you ever like? I mean, this is something totally different too. These are all black missions. These are things that technically didn't happen. You know, as NDAs for 20 plus years. But there's some pictures and there's so did you ever jot any notes down or journal or something just kept to the side, or is that all just locked up here?
No, it was just locked in Rockhead. I had some photographs, and then basically from the time I got out in 70 until 90, I had minimal contact with anybody from Vietnam. And Spider Parks was my first team leader, and he connected with me. We got reconnected around about 84, 85.
Okay.
And he was still in. He was a command sergeant major. He was down in South and Central America. He played poker with Noriega before Noriega became a bad guy,
Yeah, yeah.
in the eyes of the U.S. government.
Funny how that happens.
Oh yeah, yeah, funny. So had minimal contact, and then through Spider, we joined the Special Operations Association, and they have annual reunions. So I began
Yeah.
to reconnect gradually with a few of the key guys that had been on my team. And then we got to go to the reunion, see guys from other teams. Oh, I remember you. You were on Louisiana, you know. Our recon teams were named after states. And so it was nice. So when I got to writing and actually writing, I would interview the guys to get their story, like John Walton,
Yeah.
son of Sam Walton from Walmart fame. He was one of our medics. He's chapter 4 in Across the Fence.
Oh,
And it's
wow.
just an amazing story how John brought back everybody who was alive. One guy was killed in an accident. They had to leave him back. He was South Vietnamese. Everybody else was wounded, but John passed him up. One had been shot 4 times. Tom Cunningham had his leg blown off by a 20 mic round. The team leader called a gun run in on the team, but John got them all out. Thanks to the South Vietnamese Air Force, Captain Tin came in and saved the team. And then on October 7th, Captain Tin saved our team. He hovered for 10 minutes and took 48 hits in that helicopter. And we were lucky. Nobody was wounded.
That's great. And that's the picture right next to you there. That's depicted by, you said there's an artist. Yeah, here we
Named
go.
Sam McIntyre. He's a Green Beret medic. And that's a picture of the helicopter hovering.
Yeah.
And see our team on the ground just getting ready before we started loading up the helicopter.
Got the elephant grass flowing around you, and
Yeah, he
yeah,
couldn't
King Bee
land
just hovering there.
but he had to hover, and he just hung up there for 10 minutes. This is cool as a
Wow.
Rocky Mountain breeze.
Wow. Yeah, that takes some real cojones. That's just wild. 10 minutes hovering there, and that's really it's a group effort. You know, that culmination of uh, everything there during all of that, but being able to keep your cool in a situation to where bullets are flying around you and you're just hovering. You know, you are the big target. You're sitting there, just a gigantic target, but you know your
Wow.
mission is to sit there and hover and wait for the guys, and he did. That's wow, man.
I know those guys were so cool. I mean, I just couldn't imagine. Well, have you ever touched the controls, like the cycling stick on a helicopter? They're super
God,
sensitive. I mean, you see the old World War II movies where the guys are in an airplane, they get the stick and they go up and down, well, the helicopter is just the opposite. All you do is think about turning right and you turn right.
yeah.
I mean, the controls are, because I had a little stick time with the King Bee pilots
Oh wow.
in the co-pilot seat. They let me sit there. Like, I felt like I love flying my H-34, so I pretended I could almost take off with one, but they're very sensitive. So knowing how sensitive those cycling sticks were,
Yeah.
and to see these guys just hover like that, so it's like, oh my god,
Nerves of steel.
ice cubes in their veins.
Yeah. So you said before, on leaving the service, you left, you really got just involved in community and family. And I know like you had there's two things. You had some writing career. You were going back to school. Um, you had some writing career. There was something with a school paper? I, you
Yeah,
know,
because we returned to school in the summer of 70,
yeah,
and then at the end of 70, early 71, we put together a POW MIA concern center like this flag here,
yeah,
because we had a lot of our SAW guys went MIA. I
yeah.
mean, to this day, when you and I are sitting here talking,
Mm.
there are still 1,574 Americans listed as missing in action in Southeast Asia from the Vietnam War. So that includes Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. Well, from the Secret War alone, we've documented 58 Green Berets who are still missing in action in Cambodia, Laos, and we've documented 83 plus aviators.
Wow.
And so that's just part of it. And we worked really hard through that POW Concern Center on, I was going to Trenton State College at the time.
Yeah.
And we had a little desk set up there. People came by. We sold thousands of those POW bracelets, gave out thousands of bumper stickers to try to bring attention to the whole POW MIA issue.
Yeah.
And today it's still an issue with the vets. It's not a priority with our government to give it lip service, but in terms of getting the job done, they're just not going to happen. And on top of that, Southeast Asia has the most acidic soil in the world. So the soil is literally eating away at our guys in the ground.
Yeah.
The only thing that's left will be the teeth.
That's I know someone that did some of the recovery stuff, at least with the World War II stuff on the islands and stuff. But I know that some of those missions and stuff go out to these
Sure.
different places to recover, bodies and remains and stuff for the families. And yeah, it's a big issue and it's a humbling thing. But I
Well,
mean,
we could do another whole issue on the politics of this because
yeah,
it stinks. In the end, we're going to be our Vietnam veterans are the ones that are going to not come home.
yeah,
That's the
and
bottom
that's
line. But we could, like I said, we could talk another day on that.
no. So I mean, it sounds like you felt the pull to veterans stuff right off the
Oh,
veterans
no.
issues and veterans where, hey, where can I help here? I'm seeing
Right.
issues, and it just sounds like you got involved like right off the bat, which is that's
Absolutely.
cool.
Well, it had a new mission. And don't forget, my introduction to SOG, the King Bee flew us into FOB1. I got off the helicopter. Me, Johnny McIntyre, and John Hutchins get off the helicopter, and a recon team gets on. It's Spike Team Idaho.
Hmm.
And those two Americans, Glenn Lane and Robert Owen, are still two of the 58 Green Berets from the Secret War that are still listed as missing in action today. So we had an instant opening in recon. So that was an issue near and dear to my heart from day one at FOB1.
Yeah,
That carried over as I'm back at school. What else can we do? Well, I'm just like Joe Bip the Ragman, driving school buses for chump change. I don't have a lot of money to work with, but the president of the college and the editors of the school newspaper and the school yearbook let me have a desk that we could operate out of, and people are coming by day and night buying the bracelets, trying to keep the issue alive. We had a POW from Trenton, New Jersey. That's where I'm from, and he was an Air Force vet, and we adopted him while he was still a POW.
yeah.
And then when he came home, we had a really nice homecoming, and then to see him go through and get back into serving our country again after that, it was just all part of it. But yeah, I had a new mission, and of course, part of it just getting educated. I was a victim of pubic education.
I do think like the GI Bill exists for a reason, and I mean I really do think, and I tell a lot of the guys that I served with too, is it's a good segue in between. It's you're not jumping completely into right into the civilian world. You
Well,
have
and don't forget, there's an inherent uh, racism against Vietnam vets
yeah,
because the men from World War II, when they came home, the government would pay for whether you went to Harvard or Trenton State College, they would pay for your tuition.
yeah,
In our day, it was $200 a month, whether you went to Harvard, Yale, or Trenton State College. When they raised it to $250 a month, we were really happy. You got it for, I think the benefit was for 48 months or 36 months. I forget, but for four academic years.
man,
And when you weren't in school, you didn't get it. So you had the summer off. But, and then today, the benefits are much better. That's the way
much.
it should be.
But and that's due to this, the struggle of guys getting involved. Like you said, people get involved in this stuff and they start chipping away at the problems. They see an issue.
Sure.
I know we're still not perfect, but I think these days, when I was in, I was getting what E5 pay for the time I was in, which I was more than happy with. For me, that was okay.
Well, yeah. And then when I went through jump school, uh, I forget, I may have been still an E1. So I went to jump school because we had 100% pay raise. I was getting paid $50 a month from the Army, but jump pay was $55 a month.
Oh, there you
It was
go.
like, oh, I felt like a rich man after going through jump school in May of 1967.
Oh man, that has sure changed. That's that whole thing with like inflation, but the paratrooping, the 82nd never, the military never caught up. there's man, oh, they're way behind on that one. That would have been a heck of a thing to double your pay. That would have sold me on it in a heartbeat. I
Absolutely.
I only jumped because it was that necessity. It was a means to an end.
Yeah.
I was like, I wanted to go and be special forces, which the first time around in the course I didn't make it. But I mean, it came back and passed the SFAS the second time around. Didn't fully finish the queue. So I mean, that's a whole nother day. But
Another story, right?
another story for another time. I'm sure I'll get into it down the road. So I'm like, do you see some of the same? I know I see some of the sentiment out there towards some of the veterans and everything within college or within some of the Gen Z stuff. There's a particular one I'm thinking of right now that's coming to mind. There's a video where they're talking IQ and perception, and I think it's they interviewed 6 people on it, and there was a bunch of college students, and one of them is a Marine veteran, and the other ones, and they're all, one is a very she thinks the world of herself basically, and then they go back and they show the IQs after, and they all kind of talk down on the Marine like he's somebody stupid, and turns out he's the guy in this group with the highest IQ with the most to offer out of all of them,
Yeah.
and they're just digging on him, and I know it's different these days, but I'm sure you got some of that same type of thing in Vietnam. I mean, what do you coming back from that anyway, like what were some of the things that you guys faced and had to overcome anyway?
Well, uh, I had friends that went through much worse. In my case, I came back and they told us take your uniform off.
Yeah.
I said, no, I'm going to leave my uniform on. If anybody's got a problem, they come up and talk to me on it. But I never had like a couple of friends. One was the superintendent of schools in Oceanside when we lived in California. And he was in the Navy. He had been to Vietnam and he had been spat on when he came back after his tour of duty in Vietnam. And he was in a uniform. And we had several guys that were told that, it's better to come, if you get back to the States, go right to the restroom, put your civilian clothes on so people can't tell you're in the military. And it's like, what? I remember in 68, we had a mission. We were in for 5 days, came out under heavy enemy fire. And we get back, and there was like a Newsweek or Life magazine lying on the bed. And I picked it up, and it showed the demonstration. They had one of the big demonstrations in Washington, D.C., like 200,000 or 300,000 people. I'm going like, WTF? Have you all haven't talked to the communists that I just dealt with here
Yeah.
that were trying to kill our ass?
Yeah.
And it's just like, that's just part of that dichotomy. It's like between the propaganda that was within the anti-war movement, and there was communist infiltration there. That's part of it. And yes, there are people who are generally motivated against the war, but they didn't know my little people. I'm like Hep and Sal. They all knew their government was corrupt. They knew it, and they said, we prefer to live with a corrupt government that we know, and we're willing to die to fight communism before we have to live under the thumb of the communists.
Yeah.
And
Man.
people have never heard that side of the story.
No, it's something that it either gets swept under, or the media just it doesn't sell papers, so the media doesn't cover
and
it.
so getting back to your point from our era, I think the one true benefit from that is that ever since Vietnam, anybody who comes back, today's veterans are treated better because of what happened to our guys.
Yeah.
And the men and women that came home from Vietnam. They were treated shabbily then, but now the American public at least separates the politics from the vets, and they're treated much better, even though the VA messes around sometimes. But I can't complain. I've been in VA healthcare now for over 15 years, and they're wonderful,
Yeah.
And so I have no complaints directly. But
I've had some great, I do. I hear horror stories, and I've had a few of like my own like mixed ups and stuff in the VA, but for the most part, and my wife is a nurse. Former Air Force, and then changed jobs completely, and was like, I know what the job entails. And I was like, this is like going right back into the military, right? But I see that end of healthcare and stuff too. And it's not, a lot of this stuff is across the board. It's a lot of American healthcare system as a whole should be overhauled. But in a lot of ways, in some ways, the VA is leading the charge on some of it, and some of it, at least some of the people and some of the doctors that I've experienced are some of the best people I've come across. And they really care about the veterans and stuff that are in there. I've had good luck. Again, heard some horror stories and whatnot, but you're going to get
Oh
that.
yeah, I mean, I finally I got diagnosed with glaucoma, and
Mhm.
so I'm getting treated for it, and down at the VA in Murfreesboro, Alvin, New York
Okay.
Center. I mean, the people there are incredible, and so no complaints. They
Nice.
really have these young doctors on top of their game. They explain everything to you, and this is glaucoma. Here's your drops. We'll treat it. If things get worse, someday we'll talk further. But until then, so we keep treating it and moving on.
There you go.
Oh
So
yeah,
you gotta, sir, you're in school, you're
yeah.
raising some awareness and stuff throughout the POW side of stuff. What brought you to writing? And either from, if you want to talk about the paper, a little bit of that, is that kind of what led the way to Across the
Well,
Fence?
yeah. When I was in junior high school, we had a newspaper that came out once a month. And I
Okay.
got involved with that from ninth grade. I was the editor of it, although our advisor did all the heavy copy. But we were there, we did our little stories, then he would clean them up. And I got bit. My dad had been involved with the school paper. And so when I came home, went to after Vietnam, I'm back at college, there was an ad in the school paper said we need a sports writer. So I went down, applied, and they said, it's like a college. Anybody that volunteers, you're in. So started out with sports, did some feature writing, and then I started writing columns because I was the only person writing stuff about Vietnam in 1971 and 72 that wasn't anti-war.
Yeah.
Like that, the incursion in Cambodia should have happened much earlier. We should have had one in Laos in the early 60s. Well, these left-wing guys would just go nuts, completely nuts.
Oh, I bet.
And one day I get a phone call from a guy. He's crying. He goes, "You got to stop writing this shit in the newspaper." I go, "Why?" He said, "My name is John Meyer." He said, "My mother thought I wrote that stuff that you wrote."
Oh
So I looked
man.
in the phone address. There were 4 John Myers going to Trenton State College at the time. So I changed my byline so his mother would stop chewing him out. But yeah, it was fun. And then I
That was a
became
rather
editor
gentlemanly
of the
thing of you to
school
do.
paper. And I got copy editors that would tell you that I was not a good writer. I was a good reporter, but writing wasn't my strength. And then I got a job at the Trenton Times in 1975. And even there, I was working on my writing skills. And so I was there at Trenton for 10 years, then the San Diego Union for 8, and then a little paper up in North San Diego County called at the end, it was the North County Times. And we were there until I got laid off in '08. And then from there, I went to work at two different nonprofits at different times, helping veterans get affordable housing.
Yeah, I saw that the homeless veteran situation, which I mean, California is aren't they one of the biggest states with I know weather wise, it kind of is almost a draw to people. The weather being the way
Sure.
that it is, you kind of see phew, just a multitude of people sort of flock towards there, Florida, and that end
Oh
of
yeah.
things. I mean,
And then you have, you got all these phonies, the guys that say they're vets and they're not. And they'll
yeah,
come in with these stories. And it's like, okay, well, you can't be in our program, but if you really want to help yourself, here's a program with the county or the state. If you
yeah,
really want to get off your drugs or your alcohol and clean up your life. And sadly, too many of the times they would not. And
mm.
these are just individuals just dealing with the wannabes. I met more Green Berets in California than I served with in Vietnam.
That's I think it's one of the SEAL teams or something to where it's like there was 200 SEALs, or maybe it was SOG actually that I heard about this. There's, X amount of small number of operators, but I've met 1,000 some odd.
Yeah, yeah.
You always hear that.
Yeah,
Oh
SEAL Team
man.
6. They got hundreds of thousands of SEAL Team 6 around. A friend of mine years ago worked with an organization that busted phony SEALs, and they busted over 20,000.
Oh my God.
This is by 2006. They busted that many. I don't know how many they busted since then.
Wow. Yeah, I know
Oh
that
yeah,
the stolen valor thing was that was really big for a while. I know it's still out there and
it's still out there.
it
They're around.
yeah. I think it kind of ebbs and flows with war. You have
Sure.
anybody who's like, "Hey, I can glean something from this." And it's unfortunate I've seen some of that on the nonprofit side too,
Well, and
to
don't
where
forget
it's
you got the census. I mean,
yeah.
there's a total of 3.2 million Americans that served in Vietnam. That includes the Navy that's anchored offshore.
Yeah.
So during one of the recent census, there was 12 million people who said they were Vietnam vets, when actually there's only 3.2. And of course they're saying that for the census as part of them getting benefits and going to and working the system.
Man.
Oh yeah.
And learning how to game it, and it's just
Yep.
that's sad. That's sad. Well, let's shift back over to, your memories, writing your book and stuff
Yeah.
and getting over doing some of the interviews. And did you ever have like any kickback from some of the guys, or like how was it to reconnect with them? Like what was the
Well,
experiences?
99.99% of my experiences were all positive. We're working with our guys, going back. We did across the fence, and at the time I lived in San Diego. John Walton still lived in San Diego County, so we get together all the time for breakfast, lunch, and so when it came time for the book, I just took notes from because I was familiar with the story, with his story because he was in our base.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I built the first book. And then again, there's stories in the first, and in my books, I'll have stories that I feel I want other guys' stories. I mean, some of my experiences are interesting, but nothing like with John Walton, Lynn Black with ST Alabama, where a 9-man team came up against 10,000 during a day-long battle.
Insane.
And we know that number because he talked to an NVA officer that ambushed his team and
Yep.
confirmed that they, between the recon team and the Air Force, they inflicted 90% casualties on a 10,000 man NVA division. So get those stories in the book. In the second book, there were more stories that I didn't have time to get the first time around. Just amazing stories of our guys.
There is. That's
Most of them fun. Then, like I had a little error, like one team, we had a team that got wiped out after I got back to Vietnam on November 3rd, 1969. Um, I put in the book it was RT Virginia, when in fact it was RT Maryland. And when I left, the team leader was on Virginia. So I wrote the story about them disappearing. I assumed it was Virginia. And it's like Eldon Bardwell called me. I said, "Hey, Tilt, you got this one wrong." You go, "Oh no."
yeah. Like did anybody have like a big issue with the discrepancy, or was it like more of a hey, we I missed that one. Whoops.
Yeah,
Whoopsie
it's like
daisy.
it's my bad. It's my error, and so
Yeah.
we corrected it in later reprints, and we did the ebooks. We corrected it,
Nice. Nice.
and
That's yeah.
yeah,
That's those little details sometimes, and they will.
that's
Like
devils
people
in the
don't realize
details.
on that's guys find that stuff. The guys that were there, some of that stuff is important to them. Something that maybe you might kind of gloss over a little bit, or where it's like, you put it down and you're like, I think I got everything pretty right here. And there's a few people that agree, but there's that one person that it might be a little different, or, the
Yeah,
detail might be a little off.
well, that's why your book was great because you had some that I don't know. I just call it intimate combat detail. That's just like riveting to the pages. You stick into it, particularly when you're in that damn valley.
I,
God.
I think that anybody who's been in those situations, though, who's been into combat, sort of appreciates those little nuances. Whether it's, I'm trying to think of one exactly. I was reading your book the other night just to like refamiliarize and go back through some of the stuff. And, I mean, is there any in particular, like some of the details that you found it in your stuff to really, really cover, or that somebody found to be, of that higher importance?
Well, the story, one of the stories that we got inserted We had a great insertion. We had a wiretap running. We're observing a trail. We had an ambush set up. We were going to get a POW.
Yeah.
Everything was set up. But when we made the commo check, said, I'll be at the LZ with a POW. I gave them the code for a POW. And this rider, Spider Parks was the Cubby rider, our FAC. He
Mhm.
says, do nothing. I can't see the mountain you're on. From the
Oh,
time we've been on the ground for 4 hours or so, the weather had closed in. And so that night, they came hunting for us with lanterns and dogs. And make a long story short, at one point, an NVA passed us, and my interpreter coughed. He came up the hill, crawled up towards us, and touched my jungle boot. But he didn't do anything. He backed down, and they
oh
left,
wow.
and we went the other way, and we were socked in for 5 days. But we escaped and evaded that, and then we had contact on the last day, heavy contact before we got exfiltrated.
I bet. I bet you had the whole dang mountain out there looking for you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So that's one of those kind of moments where you're like, oh my God, yeah, people talk about that.
Wow.
That's
So
one of those moments
like
in time.
moving into more what you're doing now.
Yeah,
You've got Sodcast. I want to get back onto that just because I know I touched on it and stuff.
sure,
But you're writing these books and everything, and I know I listened to 180, long before we talked with
sure.
Jocko, and I, heard your stories and stuff coming out, and I'm like, man, this is just, this is the stuff I used to read. This is crazy. These are the guys, and uh hearing those, but then all of a sudden it developing into Sogcast. It sounded to me like you were, yeah, I'll get these guests for Jocko, and then he just came out. He's like, no, you're the one.
Well,
You're the guy
yeah, we
doing
got to give Jocko credit here. My first interview with Jocko was Jocko podcast number 180, which was June of 19. And I came back and did 181. And that day, after I drove home, I was in the parking lot at Albertsons,
it.
and
Hmm.
Jocko called and said, "Hey, my next interview just canceled for next week. Can you come back?" I go, "Jocko, is the Pope Catholic? Yeah, I'm coming back." So we went back, and over time, Jocko and I did a total of 8 interviews. And at the end of the last couple, we kept saying, "Let's do something called SOG Cast." I go, "Sure." My assumption was that Jocko was going to do it because he's just so good at this stuff. And we had the very last one was Jocko podcast, the 259. We
Okay.
interviewed Captain On, a King Bee pilot. We turn the cameras off. We're sitting there talking. He says, "Let's do the Sawcast." I go, "Okay." He said, "You're going to interview people." I go, "Okay." I said, "Jocko, with your skill, your talent, and your money, we can go places." He says, "Okay, I'll pay for it." And he has. He's been a man of his word. He sent all the recording equipment to me. I have a studio in my house. Sometimes we'll travel to a reunion to get interviews, and Jocko's people, they cover it all. So today we have 51 SOGcast interviews where I interview
Yeah.
majority are SOG men that ran recon or hatchet for us. And we try to get people in that supported us, helicopter pilots, crew chief. We finally got a SPAD pilot, and Don Ensbretson with the stories about being an A1 Skyraider, because that was the aircraft that we preferred the most because they could stay on station long. They had weapons, bombs, napalm, CBU units. They had it all, and they
All
could
the
bring
good
it
stuff.
in
Yeah.
tight, tight.
Man,
So
did
that's
you
what
ever?
that, and that's so. Again, it's thanks to Jocko. So the very first Sawcast we did now has had over 250,000 views with George
Yeah.
Sternberg, and others are getting close to those numbers. So we've had, to me, I didn't know anything about podcasts. My wife knew more about podcasts because in 2018, 2019, I was really busy with our nonprofit. I had meetings at night, helping vets do stuff. And she goes, "Yeah, there's this Navy SEAL down in San Diego. He does these great podcasts." Well, I eventually connected with Jocko, and the rest is history. But thanks to him, he's paid for it all, and he's really gotten these stories out.
Did you ever see, like, ever even think or foresee anything like this would hit?
No,
Yeah.
nothing. I mean, I I'm still learning about this whole world of social media with podcast, the impact, and try to be very careful. But it's wonderful. I mean, my world changed after that first interview. Like you said it's 180. So now that's been out, that's got over 1 million views. Number two has got over 1.5 million views, the 181. And
Wow.
these stories, and there are young men now that are hearing these, they joined the military to serve our country.
Yep.
There are other people that are just like, we didn't know this kind of shit went on. Well, yeah, it did. And I always believed that the stories were worthy of telling. That's why I did the books, to at least have something on record. So when we're gone, future generations, at least my family members, will know some of my stories, as well as some of the stories of some of the men that I had the honor to serve with.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's important. It really is. It's important this stuff gets preserved. And it's
absolutely.
awesome that you're doing, but I think it's even cooler that you never foresaw it either hitting that or hitting those amount of views, like having that sort of coverage and realizing that there is like people are hungry to hear this stuff and there is a respect there. And some of these stories are just absolutely incredible what you've been through and what some of the people and stuff go through overseas or
Well,
through
yeah, and
these
like you're
conflicts.
very humble when you talk about your stories. And in my case, if you had like a Richter scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most dangerous SOG missions or your personal, I put my missions maybe at a 6 or a 7 compared to Dick Thompson, our Medal of Honor recipients, men that are Green Berets that literally died on the
Yeah.
LZ. They would help their team get out and they would stay there fighting the NVA to the end.
Yeah.
And look at Robert Howard. There's finally a book on Robert Howard now. I mean, he could have been put in for 11 Purple Hearts. He only received 8, and he received the Medal of Honor. He was put in for the Medal of Honor 3 times, running missions out of Khartoum in 1968. So that kind of value is like a 10 or a 10 plus. Me, I'm just very fortunate to have survived this somehow. So I
Yeah.
always feel like because I was lucky enough that we could tell the story. That's why I want to do book 4, to get into some stories we haven't told yet, or to where we have told them, to come back and embellish them a little bit more.
Well, if we want to close on this one, then do you have a working title yet?
It'll be Saw Chronicles Volume 2. My
Okay.
third book was Volume 1, was focused on Operation Tailwind, which was one of the most successful operations of a hatchet force size, where they had 120 indigenous troops, 16 Green Berets. They went into a target in Western Laos to take the pressure off of the CIA that was engaged in a major battle. They went in, they took the pressure off, they destroyed 2 huge enemy caches while they were there. And the last day, they barely got out alive because the NVA came at them by thousands.
Mm.
And Mike Rose was the only medic on that mission. He passed up over 50 or 60 of those guys. Plus, he was severely wounded himself. He used his Car 15 as a crutch. And President Trump awarded him the Medal of Honor. It was October 23rd, 2017 at the White House. We were there for that. So
Man.
that's the kind of missions that we had, and just unbelievable stuff.
So last thing, is there any bit of advice that you could kind of give to somebody that might be either feeling that pull to work within the veteran space or to put these stories down? Um, Anything that you've kind of learned along the way? Give us a nugget of wisdom from
Yeah.
John
Well,
Stryker
there's
Meyer.
I think that if you're wanting to serve, I've been involved in nonprofits now for over 25 years.
Yeah.
And the thing that breaks my heart is that a lot of people, they're well intentioned. They come up with an idea. Let's do something to help veterans. Well, they'll put together a nonprofit and they begin getting money. Like in San Diego County, there's over 6,000 nonprofits. I don't know how many are there to help veterans, but there are some that are really bogus.
Yeah.
And that takes away, but they're out there fighting for the buck, taking
Yeah.
money away from the legitimate ones that are out there doing good work.
Yeah.
And so anybody who wants to help veterans, just go to your website or go locally to the American Legion or local groups that are actually working to help veterans. They can be found. Don't go starting up a nonprofit right away.
Yeah.
There's so many different organizations out there.
Okay. So
And
learn
then
the
from the
space.
writing side, like in your case, thank goodness you sat down and start writing Damn the Valley, because you had it fresh in your mind. And if anybody's going to write, if they're not sure, to at least sit down and to begin making notes. And if you can't write, I mean, some people like Nick Brockhausen, he writes like this freelance style where he'll just write about things that are in his mind.
Yeah.
As you read it in his unique fashion, you get the story of not only of what the missions were, but you get to appreciate what a crazy guy he was. Just deep
No
down
kidding.
inside, Nick is just a marvelously brilliant man.
Yeah.
He was fearless and he ran missions. So my advice would be, if you can't write with today's modern technology, at least make verbal notes. Begin verbally talking about what you did, and then over time you may get an idea, or at least talk to somebody who's done it to get an idea how you could put a focus on your story. Because but I'm biased. I mean, like our Rangers, like in your case, and the Special Forces guys, anybody that served, they've got a story. It's up to them to get it on paper and to preserve it.
Yeah, it's
And then
true.
from there, who knows where it's going to go next? Hopefully, they run into Jocko or other podcasters like Mike Glover. I mean, Jack Carr, while writing all these books, Jack is doing podcasts in his spare time.
I don't know where that guy gets the energy. He's all over the place. He's just I'm like, man, that is some high energy. I love it. I love seeing that.
Yeah.
And
he's a go-getter.
Yeah. I actually talked to his agent about getting him on to talk with him, but they were like, hey, you're pretty fresh. Like, let's get some stuff under your belt. So we'll see. Maybe in the future.
Oh, yeah.
But John,
don't give up.
Thank you. Yeah. You know what? That's the biggest one right there. Don't give up.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And taking the time.
Always good to talk to a fellow vet, and a vet that's done an outstanding book in your own right.
Oh, geez. Well, thank you. That's high praise coming from you. Thank you very much.
No, man, that I gotta tell you, when you got into that first IED experience, when you're down there in that valley, it's like, oh my God. The night I was reading it, I had to stop, because your writing was so detailed and so amazing that it hit me hard. And I salute you for that, because you got to be a good writer to capture it. And because you were there, you get that finite details, like that Jack Carr detail in all his novels. He goes out and gets that little nitty gritty stuff. Well, you're the same way. So continue to write.
Well, thank you. That's high praise coming from you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Honestly, I just hope it does the guys justice, and that it really, again, like you were saying, preservation of history is important, and getting these stories out there and down for others to read, to learn from, to glean things from. It's an important thing, and it's an important thing to do. Thank you for everything you're doing with that as well. I mean, that's you guys are paving the way. And we're following these examples. Thank you for coming on and imparting some of that wisdom there.
All right, my pleasure, my honor. Until next time, sir.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Veteran Success Story. You can find more on John Stryker Meyer and his current work that he's doing with SOG Cast just by simply looking for SOG Cast on any of the podcast platforms out there. Additionally, you can find John's books on Amazon, Across the Fence, like the one behind me, On the Ground, which is the second book, and the SOG Chronicles. During the episode, John talked about a second SOG Chronicles coming to light, and I think a lot of that has to do with the interviews that he has been doing within SOG Cast. They have over 50 episodes up, and it's really cool to to see him pulling apart an unfiltered look at the history behind the secret wars in Vietnam and getting these other perspectives. It really is an important thing that he's doing out there, and it's wild to see after all this time where it's gone, where it's come, and the reception for all this stuff. So it's really great things. It's really good to see. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And once again, I have to say thank you to John Stryker Meyer for coming on here. And until next time, this has been Veteran Success Story.